So in this video, we're going to look at the self-illusion, but we're also going to look at the government illusion. It turns out these two share a lot in common because there's a common process behind both illusions. So what is an illusion? An illusion is when a mistake is made about how something exists. So the self is an idea, and it could even be a useful idea. Consider for a moment how you treat a car that's a rental versus a car you think you own, or an apartment that you're renting versus a house that you believe is yours. And so because we have this tendency to treat things better if we think we own them, you could say, well, the idea of ownership, the idea of the self owning anything is a useful idea. But also, it can be the cause of suffering. So when that idea is mistaken for something that's a real part of reality, it can cause all kinds of suffering, from panic attacks to depression to anxiety, because now the thought that this thing I call self is actually part of it's part of the real world, then you start to worry about it. What's going to happen to it? What happens to it 50 years in the future? Will it be able to survive? What all these things that happened in the past are taken very seriously, and it causes regret. And so when that self is mistaken for something that's real, it ceases to become a useful idea, and it becomes the cause of suffering. Well, it's a very similar thing is true with government. You could say that government is a useful illusion. People write things down that become constitutions. And you could argue, well, this is a really useful idea. No problem with this at all. But of course, well, Ronald Reagan once said that government could get up and leave for 3 weeks and no one would even notice. But it can't get up and leave because it never was real in the first place. And that distinction is an important one. And they both the self-illusion and the government illusion, it stems from the process of thinking. Once thinking gets in motion, there's a strange thought behind all of it, that there must be a thinker of these thoughts. In other words, someone running the show, a CEO of sorts. And of course, we have plastered that image all over the self, but also the bureaucracy of government. And so a state can't even run unless it has a capital. And every level of bureaucracy in government has someone leading the show, some president, and then from down on, every little way that has been carved up in its abstract stories has someone running the show at every level, because it's very hard for us to imagine a world that just runs the way nature runs. And nature doesn't have a CEO. Trees grow. They don't need a constitution. They seem to get along absolutely fine. But humans, our thinking seems to create this impression that in the same way that there must be a thinker of thoughts, there must be someone's got to be running the show. Now that might work out fine too, but the problem is the illusion takes place and we mistake these abstract thoughts for something in the real world. So we may talk casually and say, well, there's some Democrats, there's some Republicans, as if these are real things. But there's just meat suits. There's no Democrat or Republican. There's just meat suits that tell different stories. There's no president. And so people say, well, who's going to be the next president? In reality, no one is going to be the next president. These things only exist in these abstract narratives. And yes, they're collective, and that does give some reality to them in the sense that ideas believed to be real are real in their consequences. Same thing how the idea of a self can cause a panic attack because it's mistaken to be real and it ends up being real in its consequences. And it's just very difficult for us to imagine a reality without thinking. And so you say, wow, I don't see the point of the video. You talk about an abstract reality, but it's still real in its consequences. So if you go out and break the law, you're still going to end up in jail. So I don't see the point. The point is that the distinction between what is real and what is an illusion is an important one. It's the difference between the useful idea of the self and a panic attack. So if you're walking along and there's just a stick out there, but your nervous system mistakes it for a snake, you're going to have a reaction. Your heart rate's going to increase. You may even jump. But just because you had that reaction, just because you've experienced the illusion, it doesn't make the stick a snake. And in that same way, government has never been real. And so there's nothing anyone can do to make it real. And that is an important distinction.